Out in the community today, I've been looking forward to getting back and speaking with this gentleman about his next book, Phil Egan. Thanks so much for joining me and welcoming me into your home again.
Thank you, Dave.
The last time we were here, in case people have forgotten, we talked about your previous book. Tell everybody what that was.
Well, that was a history of the Sarnia Fire Service.
Yeah.
It was their 175-year history of Sarnia Fire Rescue.
Yeah.
And that book came out, like say, 2 years ago in July. Mm-hmm. And was, I think, reasonably successful. Certainly the firefighters liked it. So.
Yeah, that was great. And now we're talking about Keeping the Peace, 160 Years of Policing the Imperial City.
Right.
Yeah. We don't hear this area referred to that often as the Imperial City, but there it once was. What made you decide that this was the next part in Phil Egan's writing repertoire?
Well, I think in writing the history of the fire department, the police service seemed a logical next step for us. Yeah. So the book was published by the Sarnia Historical Society, and we have a lot of respect for and admiration for our first responders, whether they be fire or police. And I think a lot of people don't understand the kind of job that both of those professions do, Dave. So, in a way, it's our way of celebrating the firefighters and the police.
Yeah, well, I couldn't agree with you more about, I think, in fact, I would say we often take for granted our first responders.
Absolutely.
And, you talk sometimes when you're a little kid, I want to be a firefighter, I want to be a police, I want to be a cop, whatever you word that, right? But there really is a lot to those jobs, and I know the stories in this book really spell it out well.
Well, that's right, and I think that I think most people will have a much better appreciation of the kind of day-to-day issues that the police face once they have a chance to delve into this book and see what the boys and women in blue are up against.
Interesting that too. It's not just the stories in this book. Like there's a lot in here. We talk about one that stuck out for me was Chief Robert Cook and the rising crime in the 70s. Yeah. To the unsolved murder of Maurice Davies. To just different aspects. This isn't just the stories. You actually talk with officers from different generations to current, and they give their perspective on it as well. Yeah,
I was very fortunate. I had a lot of cooperation with this book from the Sarnia Police Association, who actually pre-bought 400 books before I actually started writing it, and gave us some financial support in having that money in advance. There was a huge amount of support from the Sarnia Police Service. Chief Hansen basically opened their files to me, and from the police officers themselves, I probably interviewed over 40 of them, both retired officers and current officers, and particularly with Mike Bradley in the Sarnia Police Service, because I had a chance to go back and actually read the minutes of the Police Service Board dating back from 1913. Mayor Bradley told me nobody had ever asked to see those minutes before. So, in that and of course the huge archival collection of the Sarnia Observer and the Gazette, and a lot of books, a lot of published books had snippets of history about the Sarnia Police. And I probably had a bibliography of about 20 books in the end, all of which are named in Keeping the Peace, that helped me to tell this story.
It must make you feel good to know that you had that support behind you, and the people involved really. The fact that they purchased 400 books in advance, and
it really did, because it it not only provided us with financial support, but it really made everything easier. The fact that the Police Service Board endorsed the book before we started the research. The fact that the Sarnia Police Service and Chief Hansen were behind the project right from the get-go, and the fact that I believe that a number of years ago the Sarnia Police Association had actually looked into the idea of having someone write their history. And for a writer to come in and just pick it up as a project wasn't something that was going to be financially viable. So having the Sarnia Historical Society delve into this and take it on as a project made a lot of sense to everybody.
Yeah. What about confidentiality? I would imagine, I mean, aside from interviewing, there's, like I know for myself, you know, we're on camera now, but a lot of times it's the off-camera discussions, or maybe access to files. Was there that kind of concern at all?
There really wasn't, with one exception, and that was unsolved crimes.
Right.
You mentioned Morag Davies. I mean, that was something that happened, 30 some years ago, Dave. But I've talked to Chief Hansen about it, and he is determined that the Sarnia Police are going to solve that crime.
Somebody knows something.
I talked to a number of different officers who'd actually had that case file over the years, and there's a certain amount of things with unsolved crimes that you're not able to see.
Right.
But I will say that the officers that I spoke to who had been very connected with that particular crime really helped to steer me the right way.
Right.
With the Karen Coughlin murder, which goes back to 1974, Detective Inspector Chris Avery, who's the Lambton Detachment Commander for the Ontario Provincial Police, helped me to separate a lot of the rumors from fact.
Yeah.
And I found the police...
Was that difficult to have them go through rumor and fact, or were you surprised sometimes, like, oh, really, I'd heard that?
Well, speaking to those officers gave me a lot of information that I didn't have before, and that I couldn't have culled just from old newspaper articles.
Yeah.
But in all of these crimes, there's a lot of mistaken information, rumors, and things that circulate, particularly with Karen Coughlin.
Right.
Well, I shouldn't say particularly with Karen, because it was the same with Morag Davies. A lot of the press reports that were written immediately in the aftermath of that murder turned out to be completely full of erroneous information.
That's interesting, because you would think that, I guess we rely on that to be accurate, right? And you would think, very similar to what you're doing, they would have access to.
Well, I think in the
facts.
case of Morag Davies, there were a lot of different people who were speaking for the, for the police, and so that contributed to the confusion. There were a lot of officers through that crime scene. You're right. You expected to be accurate. I found that when I was reading the old Observer stories, almost every one of them was written either by my brother Paul or my sister Mary Jane, both of whom worked for the Observer at the time. So,
and were they accurate?
Well, they had errors, they had errors as well. But the cooperation from the police was incredible. It was fantastic. Yeah. They allowed me to see detailed files on any crime I asked to see. And those conversations, those files, those records, and the conversations with the officers involved really helped. The only thing I really regret was there were two police officers that I interviewed for the book, George Merwin and Bert Shane, both of whom died recently, and I was really hoping to have the book finished so that I could put a copy in their hands. Right. George Merwin was the oldest retired police officer in Sarnia, and had an institutional memory that went back to when the police station was actually in the basement of the town hall on Christina Street.
Wow.
and Bert Shane, who was involved with a number of the stories that we tell in this book. And I was very sorry that...
That's a long time ago, and I only say that because I remember, I'm going to reveal my age, when the Sarnia PD was down at the curve of Front and Christina Street there, I believe, at one time.
Well, Front and Christina, that was the old station.
Yeah.
But before that, they were actually in the old Waterworks building for 2 years. Which is gone. This is when after they.
Well, you did say 160 years of policing, so.
Yeah, it goes back to the creation of the town in 1857, and the first street inspector, a fellow named Edward Proctor, walking through the wooden sidewalks of the town of Sarnia.
Yeah. History is really important, and I know that the Sarnia Historical Society has done a good job of looking after history in this area. Sometimes things get through the cracks, but I want to talk about the process that you have here. There's so many great stories in here. You must have had difficulty filtering out what gets in and what doesn't.
Well, funnily enough, I didn't.
Oh.
That was really, for me, the easiest part of the book. And I know that surprises people because I've had a couple of people mention it to me. I was out of here for 40 years while I was working in Toronto. But my wife and I both were born in Sarnia. We both grew up here. And so I knew a lot of the important stories that had to be in the book. Mm-hmm. And the rest I really got from talking to the police officers over a period of 2 years.
Oh, okay.
I started the book off with the story of Jack Lewis, which is something that, as you know, Dave, the Historical Society has really made a point of keeping Jack Lewis's memory alive. Yeah. I tell the story about my dad, who I remember him talking to me, when I was young, and telling me this incredible story of when he was 14 years old and lining up with 6,000 other people to go through Philip's funeral home to see the bullet-riddled bodies of Checkley and Red Ryan. And, my dad died in 2009, and all his life he knew the name of Red Ryan. But I doubt if he could ever have told me the name of the police officer who was killed that day. So we've made a point of, and of course I think this was one of the other motivations. We are so familiar with the story of Jack Lewis. It was key to the book and telling that story and progressing from there, and then going back. I mean, we actually go back all the way to the origins of policing back in Old England in the 1600s and 1700s. So,
some of these conversations of the stories in here can be quite sensitive, and when I say that, I mean the story itself. Some of the families are still here, still dealing with that, and I'm probably going to refer here to Noel, and that family. And I know you've shared with me before, but tell everybody how that went and how the family was about you telling this story.
Well, I didn't know Noelle Paquette, and I didn't know her family. Mm-hmm. But like everyone in Sarnia who was here in 2013, I mean, I was horrified by that story.
Totally.
And it was certainly one of the darkest days in the city's history. I've written about Noelle before in an article in First Monday several years ago, and I sort of related the tragedy that happened to Noelle with the heroic actions of her family in creating Noelle's legacy in her memory, and the great work that charity has done. And so I think when I approached the book and started looking at situations which involved families of crime victims, I felt really strongly that, and I have to say, I'm not a journalist who have to do this kind of thing in the course of their work. I felt very strongly that I wanted them to be part of this story. I wanted their cooperation in writing the book because I thought it important not just to talk about them as faceless victims of crime. I wanted their story to be told. I wanted people to know what they were like. And so when I approached the Paquette family, I think I had that advantage of them knowing that I had written about their daughter previously with some degree of sensitivity, and they trusted me. But nonetheless, they had a family meeting, they told me, and decided whether they were going to cooperate with me, and they decided to do that. So the whole family came here one afternoon, and we sat and talked about Noelle for hours. And that really helped me to tell Noelle's story and to figuratively bring her back to life in terms of letting people know, the kind of generous spirit that she was and the kind of fun-loving person that she was. Mm-hmm. and not just to think of her as a victim. It was equally difficult with the horrific story of Jessica Nethery,
right.
because I tried for probably 6 months to contact Stephanie Nethery, Jessica's sister, without much luck. And I think they were, they had grown leery because they'd cooperated with people doing stories before and had felt they'd been burned by it.
Right. And I remember when that happened. I know where I was, and so I think that's what I find interesting about this book too. Is there's a lot of, obviously 160 years, a lot of different generations. There's so many people that will be able to relate or remember the stories in this book.
Yeah, and I should mention as well, Dave, because I think it's important that particularly in telling those two stories, Jessica Nethery and Noelle Paquette, I was really touched, really impressed by the attitude of the police when they realized that I was writing those stories. I mean, it was almost like their backs went up a bit. I mean, even after these years, they are still very protective of those families. And I remember Chief Hansen saying to me with the Nethery story, I don't know about that. Like, have you talked to the family? They're so protective of the victims of serious crimes to a degree that most people would never realize. They tend to think of the police as hardened, to this kind of thing, and they really aren't. I can't tell you how many times I've had, police officers tear up telling me about these kind of stories, and it really impressed me, the amount of compassion that these officers
Respect
have.
for the family.
Absolutely. It was a real noticeable thing, and really quite impressed me.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of the stories in here too, and that kind of relates to the community involvement of the police, Sarnia Police, and how, and I've talked to some probably mutual friends on the police force, that we're not the bad guys here. So unfortunately, we're often dealing with bad guys, so we look that way, or media and all that sort of stuff can maybe portray that way. But they're really involved in the community, and they really are here to serve the community, and that's what. And a lot of these stories reflect that. Was that something that was important to you to make sure?
Yes, it was. And of course, this is the wave of the future. I mean, I talked in the book as well after speaking, for example, to Inspector Welpley, talking about the future of policing. I remember Chief Hansen telling me that when he first joined the police force, and he's dealing with these rough old cops from the 50s, guys
I
like... I
probably know a couple he's talking about. Go ahead.
Well, guys like Clayton Jones and
Sure.
Smoke Monahan and Rex Hovey. And, he said that for something like 6 months, they referred to him as nothing but college boy,
well.
and didn't really consider him to have earned his creds until he got into his first street scrap.
Right.
But... I mentioned, toward the end of the book that the wave of the future is not only that these guys are going to have university degrees if they want to be police officers, but they're going to have degrees in psychology and human behavior, and have some knowledge of the way people act, and a better understanding of the human psyche. I mean, this is just part of the whole wave of the future. It's not like, it's like James Torrance, who was chief for years, saying, for a long time in the police service, it was more important to have brawn than brains. Right. Those days are long gone.
Especially with technology now, social media, etc. I know I've talked to some officers that I know, and they're like, just split-second decision-making even. What would you do if? Well, I can sit here and tell you what I would do. But until it's right in front of you, all of a sudden, do you turn to the left, look to the, like all these things, that's important.
And a good example is this harrowing story of what happened to Laurie Griffin, which is also covered in the book. And that was another thing that really sort of threw me, because I realized that the only two police officers in the 160-year history of the Sarnia Police, the only two officers that have ever been shot were related.
Oh, wow.
I mean, Laurie Griffin, who was shot in 1998, was the great nephew of Jack Lewis, who was killed in 1936.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, now the book is ready to go. I was privileged enough to have a kind of a proofread of that, and I'll treasure that forever. Thanks so much for that.
Not at all.
Keeping the Peace, 160 Years of Policing the Imperial City. Where's the event coming up soon? At the police station, right?
We're doing the launch, the public launch at the police station on Sunday, March 22nd.
Okay.
That actually happens to be the 76th anniversary of Roy Vanderveer's death, who was our second police line of duty death. It starts at 10 o'clock in the morning and runs till 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Every 20 minutes, there's escorted tours of the police station.
Okay.
They'll take people down to dispatch, to the firing range, to the cells even.
Yeah.
And they've cleared the prisoners out for that day.
Maybe lock you up if you don't behave on the tour.
And then the Sarnia Police Association are cooking hot dogs for free out behind the emergency command post. Is going to be there, so people can have a look at that. If the kids want to get into a police car and have a look, there's going to be a couple of cruisers there to allow them to do that. And then they can come and see me and hopefully buy a copy of the book and learn the history of the Sarnia Police.
Fantastic.
And of course, it's not just Sarnia Police, but there are stories here involving the Ontario Provincial Police,
right? The
CN Police, the Canada Service Border Agents, the Mounties, everything. Every aspect of policing.
Fantastic. And how much is the book?
The hardcover is $49.95.
Okay.
Softcover $39.95, and both are available at the police station on March 22nd.
Right. And your wife will be glad to have you back.
Well,
after all this time,
I've got another project looming ahead, but certainly I'm glad that this one is done, and you know, I know a lot of police officers have been looking forward to it, so I'm happy to deliver it to them.
Certainly. Phil, thank you so much.
Thank you, Dave.
Really appreciate your time here. Looking forward to more from you in the future.
Thanks very much.
You can meet Phil Egan. We're going to go back into the studio, give you all the details, when you're going to see him, get the tour of the police station, and remember, buy the book, Keeping the Peace by Phil Egan. Out in the community this week, boy, there's lots going on that we could be talking about, but we're talking about something positive here today. It's coming up as World Down Syndrome Day, and Helen Van Sligtenhorst is here to talk with me. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for interviewing us. We love when we get the opportunity to talk about something that's very close to my heart, because I have a daughter who is going to be 21 in September, and she was born with Down syndrome.
Oh, okay.
So this cause is something that I really believe in, and I am very grateful that so much awareness is being done now, and to create an environment where inclusion is happening. And that's important.
And speaking of awareness, okay, this is going to hurt. Let's try this. She's making
I got mine up.
We got, right,
See,
we got
look.
the socks.
Yeah, exactly. So
That's
why are we wearing?
We were toe touching.
Yes, there we go.
Right now.
No, that's okay, because there was no COVID-19 happening there.
Right. So we're talking about this because, well, like you said, and even when I talked to you on the phone about setting this interview up, I was like, there really hasn't been a lot of attention about this, right?
Well, I think there's been increments. I would say increments. And one of the big things that happened for us was in 2011, the United Nations declared World Down Syndrome Day to be March 21st. Yeah. And March 21st was chosen because there are 3 chromosomes on the 21st chromosome. And that's what's called trisomy 21, which is the genetic terminology used to describe Down syndrome.
Okay.
So that's why. And the United Nations said, here is what an individual with Down syndrome is entitled to. And you would think that, well, any individual. But what they found was a lot of times they needed to make this very clear to people to say, yes, they're entitled to a quality education, affordable housing, gainful employment, loving relationships, to be integrated fully into a community that they live in. Yeah. And that is something that we, as a Down syndrome support group, are also trying to endorse. I have been very fortunate for most of my daughter's academic career. She has been in a school that has been very inclusive. And we often joke with my husband and I when we go out with her, she's like our own little rock star because people are waving at her, saying hi, fist bumping. And she is like, people know her. And isn't that wonderful? Yeah. She's not being, you're over there and we are over here. Right, no, right. It's everybody.
What's her name?
Her name is Sydney, as in Sydney, Australia.
Sydney, okay, very good.
Yes.
And what's Sydney taking in school, and what kind of activities is she involved in?
What kind of activities is this girl involved with?
Oh
my goodness. This girl is a busy girl. She is involved on Monday nights. She does boxing with Ironworks. Thank you, Ironworks, for all that you do for those with Ironworks is fantastic. They are very inclusive. Then Tuesday nights, she does body balance. Wednesday nights, she does bowling. Thursday nights, she does basketball. Saturday morning, she does weights. She also has sleepovers with friends. She's been to prom twice at St. Pat's.
Nice.
Once she was promposaled to. The second time she did the promposaling. And she has a boyfriend and has had a boyfriend since grade 9. When she walked into school, this guy right away, he adores her. My children, my other 2 daughters, I have said to them, if you can find a man who adores you the way Sydney's boyfriend adores his name is Owen, he is just so wonderful to her, and he's so gentle and kind, and he just is good to her. And I thought, you know what? The United Nations got it right. Of course she's entitled to a loving relationship.
Yeah.
And that's what we want for her.
Fantastic.
And
so what's happening on this particular day, and what kind of things happen locally to give people support who need it?
Well, I'm going to answer that question in 2 parts.
Sure.
What's happening locally? We as a Down syndrome support group are selling socks, the ones that you're wearing. Yep, like do it again. Here we go. Come on, got it. Anyway, we are selling those socks to raise money. Okay. We, as a support group, in a 12-month period, not in a calendar year, but in a 12-month period, there were 8 babies born in the Sarnia-Lambton area with Down syndrome from 2018 to 2019. Mm-hmm. So there is so much to learn. There are so much bureaucracy, paperwork, so many acronyms, SSAH, IEPs, ODSP, passport funding, all this different stuff that you have to deal with how to fill out the proper form to get your doctor to sign so you can declare it on your taxes.
Right.
All this different bureaucracy. It's overwhelming. When I had Sydney, she had some complications. She was born with a club foot, not related to Down syndrome. Oh. She also had some health issues with respect to her heart, and she also had some issues with hearing and needed tubes from Dr. Hines here in town.
Okay.
My daughter has had, I think, 18 surgeries, whether it was for her foot, teeth, ears, whatever. So sometimes you need that support, and you need someone to say, is this ever going to end? Is it going to be worth it? I'm just feeling overwhelmed. And I can honestly say, now that we're approaching 21 with her age, she is thriving, enjoying life, living it to its fullest. That's part of our role as our support group, is to say, we're here. Mm-hmm. I had someone who went before me.
Right.
Now it's my turn to pay it back. Mm-hmm. And we have faithful attendees, and we can go to conferences. We provide free speech therapy.
Okay.
So normally speech therapy is $120 an hour.
Wow.
With a certified speech therapist.
And who makes that kind of money an hour at their job? Typically?
Well, the speech therapy, really?
Right, yeah.
So now what we do is we fund that. So we have a speech camp that runs once a month, and it is for babies to 21 years old, and they have different groupings based on abilities. And the moral of the story is, if my daughter can tell you what she needs, how much more free is her life going to be?
Right.
So when we go out to restaurants, she tells the waitress, this is what I want to eat. When she goes to the doctor, she's the one that tells the doctor, this is where I hurt. She's the one that tells her sisters, don't bug me. Right. She's just like every other kid. Her sisters get on her nerves. She tells them. The other day,
go away.
Yeah, I was trying to talk to her, and I was talking on this Bluetooth in the car, and I felt like there was because we were going through some dead space. So I was saying things louder. She said, "Mom, are you yelling at me? You don't need to yell at me. I'm fine." And I said, "No, I'm not yelling at you. I just didn't know if you could hear me." So we have life things like that as well.
Yeah. What and that's for the person directly dealing with Down syndrome, but then there's the parents involved.
Yes.
Like, for example, when Sydney was first born, that had to be an emotional time for you.
It was. And there are a couple things that I want to say. First of all, we are very fortunate that we have the support systems in this community. St. Clair Child and Youth,
Yes.
Family Counseling Center, Pathways Health Center for Children. Second to none.
100%.
Fantastic. OT, PT, speech therapy, early interventions, guidance for parents, social workers. It's wonderful. There is a community who backs not only the child but the parents.
Yeah.
And that is really important.
Certainly.
And it's also important.
Parents are people too,
yeah,
right?
exactly. And the second thing I want to say is when you go to see someone who's just had a baby with Down syndrome, the one recommendation I really want people to hear is see the baby first.
Okay.
So if you normally, when you go see a brand new baby, you unwrap the baby and you look for fingers and toes,
Yeah.
do that. If you normally see a baby and the baby's bald and you rub the baby's head, do that.
Right.
If you normally see the cute little baby's nose, do that.
Yeah.
Recognize that this mother has had a baby
do what you would
first.
normally do.
Right.
Yeah, makes
And
sense.
please don't say the words, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Because really, our lives, I can't imagine what my life would be like without having Sydney in my life. In fact, there have been challenges. I'm not going to lie to you. There are times when, the year that I had our daughter, there were 5 girls born. She was the only one born with developmental disabilities. So, hearing the other girls going off to university or getting their driver's license, it doesn't say that that didn't cause a little twinge in my heart.
Understandable.
But on the whole, there's been more positives than negatives.
Right.
And
every child, every person born has challenges as
Yes.
they grow. They're
Exactly.
just different challenges, right?
Exactly.
And how you adapt to that.
exactly.
And how you move forward with it. Yeah.
So, yes.
What now? Let's talk about money. Everybody needs money to keep
Yes,
these kind of things
yes.
funded and everything. And that's the socks are part
That's
of this,
correct.
right?
We have sold more than 1,000 pair of socks.
Wow. And how
Yes.
much are the socks?
Only $3.
$3. Wow. And where can they get the socks?
St. Clair Child and Youth,
Okay.
Jan Fairburn Burr.
All
So
right.
it's Jan Fairburn Burr at St. Clair Child and Youth here at Harbor Bay Clothing through me.
Yep.
And yes, we do need money because we spend about $10,000 a year just on that speech camp alone.
I was just going to say the
Yes.
speech alone.
Because we not
Need to
just
buy a whole
have,
bunch of socks.
Yeah, we do. Not just because we have a speech therapist, but we have a CDA, which is a communicative disorder assistant. So there are always 2 people working with that child.
Yeah.
And as I said, we break them into groups so that child does get one-on-one attention because that early babbling, early noise making, early cueing is so important. And that's what sets the foundation for further communication. So that we really, really strongly believe in that independence of dialogue, communication,
Yeah.
telling needs, wants. They need that.
Yeah. What keeps you going? We talk about those challenges, and I would imagine some of those challenges are a little more extreme than maybe some of us are used to. What part of it?
Well, I've
pushes
been
you
very
through?
fortunate in that Sydney is a person who loves life.
Right.
She loves going to boxing. And when I see her interact with other people, for example, when she first started boxing, it's like, ooh. But then the person that she works with has just fallen in love with Sydney, and she's like, Sydney, you're a rock star. You're doing so great. And they now look forward to seeing each other
Right.
on Monday nights.
Right.
I love the fact that she's got a best friend, and with that best friend came a mom who I've become close to,
Right.
and now we do stuff together as a group.
Cool.
Pathways did an expressive arts show for the last 3 or 4 years where our kids got to be on stage. And in fact, the first year I had no idea this was going to happen, and my husband said, there's a surprise, just wait.
okay.
So I went and watched the show, and she did a father-daughter dance with her dad.
Oh, nice.
And I can guarantee you, I had about
Oh,
30
they're-
people
they're
there.
tugging on the heartstrings.
Oh
there.
my goodness, I was like,
way to go.
and I'm like,
That's good though,
but you know
right?
what?
That's real.
Exactly.
Yeah,
it's
that's
real
good.
and it's honest and it's truth. And what it also is it's showing what Sydney can do.
Right.
And my tagline is, let's stop putting barriers. Let's say what they can't do. Let's show what they can. For example, have you been ever on a TV set of a series?
I haven't done that one.
Well, my daughter has been on The Handmaid's Tale.
Oh, is that right?
She was one of the 4 girls who went, and we went to Hamilton to a secret location to be on the hand. I was probably this far away from Elizabeth Moss.
Oh, well, okay.
And she was on the show. She's in the first 52 seconds of the last episode of season 3.
Wow.
Have you, so she's done that. When Swift was here, she was asked to introduce Peanut Butter Falcon.
Nice.
And the lead character of Peanut Butter Falcon is a man with Down syndrome.
Oh, okay.
That same man was at the Oscars who introduced a category.
Maybe we need to have Sydney here on the show.
You know
what?
what?
To her.
Exactly. And that's the thing. Like, she is not. There's no level of fear. If anybody's ever been to Disney, they know the ride Expedition Everest or whatever it's called. Yeah. She's been on that ride 8 times. She loves roller coasters. Wow. The Aerosmith ride. She just embraces life, and she loves life.
Right.
And she's. Her 2 sisters, actually, we had a situation which was a bit of a negative situation because, again, part of my job, what I really take seriously, is education.
Right.
Teaching. Not in a negative way where, like, oh, you shouldn't be so rude, but did you know that individuals with Down syndrome can do this? There's a great YouTube video that shows individuals with Down syndrome have special needs, and one of them gets served a dinosaur egg.
Okay.
Well, you know what? Don't we all have special needs?
Absolutely.
Like, I was on a show where they were talking, this first segment before mine was about mental health. Isn't that something that we all need to be considerate
Absolutely.
of? So let's all treat each other gently, considerately, and be aware of each other's needs and just be respectful.
There was a group a while ago, and a friend of mine often reminds me, all you need is love.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And not only that, just what I'm finding when I see Sydney out in the community, for example, if she goes to Tim Hortons and orders her raspberry lemonade, even in the dead of winter, people are smiling, they're waiting, they're patient, and that's all that we need. And Maclean's did an article where they interviewed people, and they were talking about kindness. It was just after the massacre in New Zealand.
Right.
And they interviewed this employer in Toronto, and he had multiple Tim Hortons, and he said he has hired individuals with Down syndrome at every one of them. Do you want to know why?
Because they're kind.
Because once you train them, they remember.
Right.
2, they don't do the sick day things. They come to work.
Right.
3, customers love them.
Yeah.
The interaction with them.
Yeah.
And they are conscientious and diligent workers. He said, best decision ever. First time he did it, he was a bit
skeptical.
Yes.
Sure.
But he said,
and that's fair, right?
Yes, absolutely. And now he said best decision ever. And the rapport, because usually when you go to a Tim Hortons, it's like in and out. Yeah, don't bug me.
Yeah, quick.
But people were willing to invest in the relationship with that particular individual.
Relationships.
Yes. And we feel very fortunate that the kids, like, I'm not just talking about my child, but I'm talking about multiple children. It's not like, remember New Hope School? You go to school over there. Don't come with our school.
Yeah.
Now, in the halls, in the classes.
Grade 7 and 8, I went to special education classes, right? Because I had reading and different learning disabilities, and it was over in the corner. And I didn't have Down syndrome or anything like that, but that alone was just labeled.
Yes.
Right?
Let's remove the labels. Let's say, everybody, you matter. Count them in.
Can't we all just get along?
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm here for. And I'm not doing this alone. As I said, there have been parents who have paved the way for me and for our children. And I'm here. Exactly. Yeah. And then next, we'll help the ones coming up. And we do Santa Claus, we do Christmas parties, we do picnics in the park.
Nice.
We have also a night for parents. So that parents can just say, how do I handle this? What did you do when? How old was your daughter when they toileted? Could your daughter go to school in pull-ups and all that sort of stuff? Because everything, there's supposedly milestones that your child's supposed to reach at certain ages. You should have a child walking at this time. The teeth should be coming in. They should be babbling, blah, blah, blah.
Just like anybody else.
Exactly.
Maybe at different times, right?
Exactly. So don't worry. Or here's where you go to get, if you're There's so many supports out there. For example, Easter Seals and other charitable organizations that can help fund when you have financial difficulties, or not even just financial, because who usually has a child that's still in diapers at 4?
Right.
Well, we did.
Yeah.
So there's funding available for things like that. And it's so nice that you can say, hey, did you know that? Blah, blah, blah. And they're like, oh, I didn't know that.
I can reach out to.
Exactly.
Right.
And it's nice to have that community support, because it does take a village to raise a child.
I couldn't agree with you more on
Exactly. So,
well, Helen, tell everybody, we could talk about this for hours.
we
I'm
could,
sure.
because it's really something I'm passionate.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And I always say that once I get people talking about their passion, I don't have to do too much except listen. But we want to get some information out to the viewers there. How can they find out more about this?
Well, you can contact St. Clair Child and Youth, and it's through Jan Fairburn Burr. If you're looking for your funky socks, what we're doing is we're saying, yes, the socks are $3, and you're right, $3 for a pair of socks, and they're pretty good quality socks.
They're pretty comfy.
Yes, but we're also saying, would you mind giving up your coffee and your $2 and make a donation to the Down Syndrome Association? And that's basically it. So we're not asking for, if anybody wants to donate big dollars, of course we'll take it. We're not going to ever say no.
Yes, money.
We will. But at the same time, we just a conscientious thought.
Yep.
A conscientious thought of, here's what, I'm not going to have my coffee. I'm going to give it, and while I'm doing it, I'm going to bring on my funky socks.
Yep, there you go.
So,
Helen, thank you so much for
it was
sharing
a
this story
pleasure.
here today. Sydney, I'm talking to you. I'd love to have you on the show and talk about boxing if that's what you want to talk about.
You know what? You should probably video her doing it.
There you go.
She got boxing gloves for Christmas, and her sister's like, yeah, Sydney, show me what you did. So her sister put on the pads that she hits.
Oh, yeah, right.
And she just went at it. She went, holy mom, she's ever good. I went, yeah.
You better look out.
Yeah, exactly.
When Sydney says, leave me alone, you better, right? World Down Syndrome Day is coming up March 21st. Helen, thanks so much again for talking
My
with us.
pleasure.
I appreciate it. We're going to go back into the studio now, give you some websites and information so you can find out more and how you can get those funky, I can't lift my leg up again. Get those funky socks.
Do you want me to do it for you?
Well, okay,
oh,
I'll
come
try.
on. We can do it
I'll
together.
try
Ready?
more time.
1, 2, 3.
There we go.
Yay!
Go get your socks. All right, that's it for this interview. We'll talk to you soon.